My name is Zoe. I am 32 years old, and I caught the man I loved secretly crushing a pill into my dinner while he thought I was not watching. Instead of screaming or confronting him, I acted completely normal. I ate absolutely nothing. Then I quietly set a trap to uncover his true intentions. What I discovered lurking in the shadows of our perfect marriage left me terrified and changed everything between us. Before I tell you how I dismantled his entire life and sent my perfect husband to federal prison, please hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Standing in the deep shadow of our kitchen hallway, my heart stopped beating entirely. My husband of 5 years, Jamal, stood by the massive marble island, his broad shoulders blocking the warm pendant light. He was wearing his tailored charcoal suit, the exact one he wore when closing multi-million-dollar deals at the investment bank downtown. But he was not closing a corporate deal tonight. He was methodically crushing a small, chalky white pill using the back of a heavy silver spoon. Once the pill was reduced to a fine dust, he scraped exactly half of it into my glass of expensive red wine and sprinkled the rest over the steaming plate of seafood pasta he had lovingly prepared for me. He stirred the wine with a long spoon, watching the mysterious powder dissolve completely into the deep ruby liquid. My breath caught sharply in my throat. This was the man who brought me fresh coffee in bed, who kissed my forehead every single morning, who held my hand tightly at upscale Atlanta charity galas. Now he was intentionally poisoning my food. Panic screamed in my ears, urging me to run out the front door and call the police immediately. But I am the vice president of public relations for one of the largest healthcare networks in the South. My entire career is built on crisis management, anticipating disaster, and controlling the narrative before it controls you. If I confronted him right now, he would lie effortlessly. He would say it was just a vitamin or a harmless supplement. He would gaslight me, a cruel tactic he had been perfecting over the last few months. So I took a deep, silent breath, forcing my racing heart to slow down its frantic rhythm. I needed to know why he was doing this. I waited exactly 30 seconds, arranged my face into a convincing expression of sheer exhaustion, and stepped out of the shadows. I let my heels click heavily on the hardwood floor, announcing my presence. Jamal turned around smoothly, a warm, practiced smile spreading across his handsome face. He looked like the ultimate prize, the perfect, successful black gentleman every mother prayed her daughter would marry. "Hey, baby," he said, his voice as smooth as velvet. "I made your absolute favorite tonight. You looked so stressed this morning, I figured you needed a break." I walked up to him and kissed his cheek, my stomach physically churning at the close proximity. "Thank you," I said, rubbing my temples dramatically. "It was a brutal day at the firm today. I am completely drained." I reached for the wine glass, making my hand deliberately unsteady. As my fingers brushed the crystal, I knocked it over with a forceful push. The dark red liquid spilled across the pristine white marble counter, dripping rapidly onto the floor. "Oh my gosh," I gasped, feigning extreme clumsiness. "I am so sorry, Jamal. I am just so tired I cannot even hold a glass properly tonight." A brief flash of cold irritation crossed his eyes, gone so fast anyone else would have missed it completely. "It is okay," he said, forcing a gentle chuckle. "I will clean it up right now. Just sit down and eat your pasta before it gets cold." Right on cue, his phone rang loudly from the living room. It was his signature custom ringtone. "Let me grab that quickly," he muttered, turning his back on me. The moment he stepped out of the kitchen, I moved with terrifying speed. I grabbed the heavy plate of seafood pasta, scraped the entire contents directly into the garbage disposal, and flipped the switch, grinding the dangerous evidence away. I smeared a tiny bit of sauce on the rim of the plate, and on a silver fork, leaving it in the sink to look like I had devoured the meal in a starving rush. When Jamal returned to the kitchen, I was leaning heavily against the counter, blinking my eyes slowly. "Wow," I mumbled, purposely slurring my words just a little bit. "That really hit the spot. But I think I ate way too fast. I feel incredibly dizzy suddenly." Jamal stepped much closer, his dark eyes scanning the empty plate in the sink. A look of profound satisfaction settled over his features. "You work too hard, Zoe," he whispered, wrapping a strong arm around my waist to support my supposedly failing balance. Let us get you straight to bed. He guided me upstairs to our master bedroom, acting the part of the devoted caretaker perfectly. I let my body go completely limp, playing the role of the drugged, incapacitated wife. As he tucked the heavy duvet around my shoulders, my mind raced through the terrifying reality of our lives. On paper, we were Atlanta Black royalty. We belonged to the right country clubs, attended the most exclusive galas in Buckhead, and projected an image of flawless wealth and success. But behind the designer clothes and luxury cars, there was a dark, festering rot. The root of that toxic rot was money. Specifically, my money. When my father passed away 3 years ago, he left me a secure trust fund worth $4 million. He was a brilliant, hardworking man who wanted to ensure I was always financially protected. Jamal had been subtly trying to gain control of those accounts ever since we got married. But it was not just Jamal causing problems. It was his entire toxic family. His older sister Keisha was a social media socialite who wore designer brands she could never afford, constantly maxing out multiple credit cards to maintain her fake lavish lifestyle. Her husband Terrence was a shady real estate investor who sold fraudulent mentorship courses and flipped houses that always seemed to end up in foreclosure. And then there was Shirley, my overbearing mother-in-law. She was the undisputed queen of drama at her massive megachurch, a woman who wore oversized hats and self-righteousness like impenetrable armor. Shirley absolutely despised me because I was independent, because I did not cater to her son like a servant, and because my father had secured my wealth so her greedy family could not easily touch it. For months, they had been making subtle, cruel comments about my memory, my high stress levels, and my overall mental stability. They were planting insidious seeds, and tonight I was finally seeing the terrifying harvest. I kept my eyes tightly shut, regulating my breathing into a slow, deep, rhythmic pattern to mimic heavy sleep. The digital clock on the wooden nightstand glowing a faint red showed it was nearly midnight. I waited in the darkness for what felt like an absolute eternity. Finally, at exactly 2 in the morning, the heavy bedroom door clicked open. The metal hinges barely made a sound in the quiet house. I did not move a single muscle. I felt the expensive mattress shift as Jamal approached my side of the bed. He stood silently over me for a long moment, listening closely to my breathing. Answering the drugs had taken full effect on my system. Then he reached down and grabbed my right hand. His grip was clinical, entirely devoid of any husbandly affection. I kept my arm completely limp, offering dead weight in his firm grasp. He lifted my hand and pressed my thumb against the sensor of my smartphone. A quiet chime indicated the device was successfully unlocked. Next, he navigated quickly to my secure banking application. I knew this because I could see the faint blue glow of the screen illuminating his face through the tiny slit of my eyelids. He needed my fingerprint again to authorize access to the trust fund interface. He pressed my thumb down a second time. But the banking app was not enough for what he planned. The master routing numbers and the secondary authentication codes for the trust were secured in a biometric mini-safe hidden deep inside my walk-in closet. I heard him place my phone gently on the mattress beside me. He leaned down low, his face hovering mere inches from mine. Suddenly, a blinding, piercing beam of bright light hit my face. He had brought a tactical flashlight. With his free hand, he roughly forced my left eyelid open. The sudden intrusion of harsh light was agonizing, but I forced my eye to remain glassy, unfocused, and entirely unresponsive to the stimulus. He held a portable retinal scanner right up to my pupil. The small machine emitted a soft beep. The safe was unlocked. My heart slammed against my ribs so violently, I genuinely thought the sound would echo in the silent room. My husband, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, was methodically and ruthlessly violating my physical body to steal my inheritance. I listened carefully to his quiet footsteps moving into the dark walk-in closet. The soft, mechanical click of the safe door opening followed immediately. I dared to open my eyes just a tiny fraction more. In the dim light, I saw him pulling out the thick, bound legal documents that contained the master account numbers, the offshore transfer protocols, and the property deeds. He pulled out his own phone and began photographing every single page, the faint shutter sound, masking the absolute destruction of our marriage. He was stealing my financial identity piece by piece. He spent 10 long minutes photographing everything before meticulously placing the documents back, locking the safe securely, and returning to the bedroom. He placed my phone back on the nightstand exactly where I had left it earlier. Then he walked out of the room, quietly shutting the door behind him. The moment the latch clicked shut, I shot up in bed, my entire body trembling with a potent mixture of pure terror and blinding rage. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type my own passcode to unlock the screen. I desperately needed to see what he had been doing, because my phone was secretly synced with our shared cloud storage for photos and certain applications. I quickly opened his digital trash bin, hoping he had been careless in his haste. I found a text message screenshot he had taken just minutes ago, right before deleting it from his own device. It was a private message he had sent to his sister Keisha. The cruel words on the glowing screen made my blood run completely cold. I got the passcodes. We will have the money to cover Terrence's mess by Friday. Keep making her think she is losing her mind. The sheer malice in those words paralyzed me for a fraction of a second. I stared at the glowing screen of his digital trash bin, my mind struggling to process the absolute betrayal. My own husband was actively conspiring with his sister to steal my inheritance, pay off her husband's massive debts, and drive me clinically insane in the process. A cold, calculating survival instinct completely overwrote my panic. I swiftly deleted the screenshot from the trash bin, erasing all evidence of my discovery, and placed the phone back on the nightstand exactly where he had left it. I slipped back under the heavy duvet, closed my eyes, and waited for the dawn, my heart pounding a slow and steady rhythm of pure vengeance. When the morning sun finally broke through our heavy silk curtains, I forced my body to mimic the intense lethargy of a heavily medicated woman. I groaned loudly, shifting under the sheets, and rubbed my eyes as if fighting through a thick, disorienting fog. Jamal immediately rolled over and wrapped his strong arms around me, kissing my bare shoulder with a terrifyingly convincing tenderness. "Good morning, beautiful," he whispered softly, his voice dripping with fake devotion. "You slept like a rock last night." I sat up very slowly and let my head loll to the side. "I feel terrible," I muttered, rubbing my temples with exaggerated effort. "My head is pounding, and everything feels incredibly fuzzy." Jamal sighed heavily and adopted a look of profound husbandly sorrow. "Zoe, we really need to talk about this," he said, his brow furrowed in manufactured concern. "You have been so forgetful lately. Your mind is slipping, and it is genuinely scaring me. I think the stress of your job is finally breaking you down." I nodded weakly and forced a single pathetic tear to roll down my cheek. I promised him I would take it easy today and headed straight to the master bathroom to shower. The moment the hot water hit my skin, my entire demeanor shifted. The vulnerable, confused wife washed down the drain, replaced by a ruthless corporate executive ready for war. I dressed in my sharpest navy blue power suit, grabbed my designer handbag, and drove straight past my office building. Instead, I headed to a discreet coffee shop on the other side of Atlanta to meet the one person I trusted completely. My younger brother Darius was already waiting in a dimly lit booth in the very back. Darius is 28 years old and a senior cybersecurity architect for a major tech firm. He is brilliant, fiercely loyal, and absolutely hates my husband. I slid into the leather booth and immediately handed him my phone. "Clone it," I ordered quietly. "Give me full access to everything he does." While his fingers flew across his heavily modified laptop keyboard, I laid out everything that had happened the night before. I told him about the crushed pills, the retinal scan, and the deleted text message to Keisha. Darius clenched his jaw so tightly I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. "I always knew his family was completely toxic," he said, his voice a low, angry rumble. "But this is a literal criminal conspiracy. We needed to understand exactly what Terrence had done to put them in this desperate position." Keisha and Terrence were notorious in our affluent social circles for flaunting a lifestyle they could not actually afford. Keisha constantly posted pictures on Instagram, wearing fresh off the runway designer clothes, posing in front of luxury cars, and checking into five-star resorts. But anyone who paid close attention knew it was all a fragile facade built on maxed-out credit cards and predatory loans. Terrence portrayed himself as a highly successful real estate developer. He sold expensive, fraudulent mentorship courses online, promising to teach young black men how to build generational wealth. In reality, he was a shady hustler who flipped dilapidated houses using terrible contractors and questionable funding. Recently, Terrence had tried to secure a major commercial development project in Buckhead. He wanted to play in the big leagues, but the deal had spectacularly collapsed due to his gross incompetence. Rumors had been swirling at the country club that Terrence had borrowed heavy capital from some extremely dangerous individuals to fund the initial purchase. Now those individuals wanted their money back with steep interest. Darius handed my phone back to me and passed me a secondary burner device. This burner is directly linked to his network now, Darius explained. He thinks he is secure, but his entire digital footprint is currently routing through my personal servers. We spent the next 2 hours digging through the encrypted files Jamal thought he had brilliantly hidden in his secure cloud storage. What we found was far worse than a simple theft. Jamal had quietly registered a limited liability company in the state of Delaware. He had named the company using my maiden name, ensuring it looked like my personal business venture. He had already drafted the complex financial transfer paperwork to shift Terrence's $2 million debt directly into this new shell company. If he executed this plan, the dangerous men Terrence owed money to would legally come after me and my assets. Jamal was setting me up to be the ultimate financial scapegoat for his family's spectacular failures. But the horror did not stop there. Darius accessed Jamal's recent web search history and hidden medical supply purchases. Jamal had bypassed standard pharmacies and used the dark web to purchase a massive supply of high-grade antipsychotic medication. These were serious heavy-duty drugs, usually reserved for patients with severe schizophrenia or profound bipolar disorder. The side effects for a healthy person included severe memory loss, extreme lethargy, intense confusion, and eventual cognitive decline. Hi is creating a medical paper trail, Darius said, his voice thick with absolute disgust. Hi is deliberately poisoning you to manufacture a history of severe mental instability. Once a medical professional diagnoses you as mentally unfit, he can take that diagnosis straight to a judge. He wants to file for a conservatorship over you, Zoe. A conservatorship meant Jamal would gain total legal and financial authority over my entire life. He would control my health care, my physical freedom, and most importantly, my $4 million trust fund. I would be trapped in my own body, legally powerless, while he and his toxic family drained my father's legacy to save their own worthless skins. I felt a wave of cold nausea wash over me quickly, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. They thought they could break my mind and steal my future. They had severely underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I gave Darius a highly specific list of immediate tasks, prioritizing securing my financial accounts with new unhackable physical authentication protocols that Jamal could not bypass while I was sleeping. Then I left the coffee shop and drove straight back to my massive house in the affluent suburbs. Jamal was currently at his corporate office downtown, which gave me a crucial window of opportunity. I walked directly into Jamal's home office on the first floor. It was a perfectly curated space of dark mahogany and expensive leather designed to project an image of unmatched professional success. I put on a pair of thin latex gloves to ensure I left absolutely no trace of my search. I needed to know what other physical evidence he was hiding in this house. I went through his desk drawers with methodical precision, checking behind the files under the heavy wooden trays and inside the hollow base of his expensive desk lamp. I found nothing incriminating. I stood in the center of the room, slowly scanning the space for anything out of place. My eyes landed on the sleek, expensive air purifier sitting on the top corner of his mahogany bookshelf. It was an odd placement for that specific device. I pulled over a sturdy leather chair, climbed up carefully, and stepped closer to the machine. I inspected the dark slatted ventilation grill on the front of the unit. Deep inside the narrow vents, carefully hidden behind a thin layer of mesh filter, I saw it. A microscopic, blinking red light. It was a high-definition hidden camera. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. He was not just poisoning my food, he was actively monitoring my every single move. He wanted undeniable video evidence of my supposedly erratic behavior to show the presiding judge during his planned conservatorship hearing. He was documenting my forced descent into madness. Just as that terrifying thought crossed my mind, the burner phone Darius had given me vibrated sharply in my pocket. I carefully pulled it out, making sure to keep my body angled away from the hidden camera's line of sight. The notification on the bright screen was a glaring red security banner. Darius had set up an alert system for whenever Jamal accessed any surveillance applications. The message was clear and absolutely terrifying in its immediacy. Jamal had just opened the live security feed application on his primary phone from his corporate office downtown. The camera was active right now. He was logging into the live feed at this very second to watch me. I had mere seconds to react before he saw me staring at his hidden lens wearing latex gloves. I had mere seconds to react before he saw me staring at his hidden lens wearing latex gloves. My mind snapped into pure survival mode. I did the only thing I could do. I collapsed. I threw my body hard against the expensive Persian rug, making sure the heavy thud would register on the camera microphone. As I hit the floor, I swiftly peeled the thin latex gloves off my sweating hands, balling them up tightly into my fist, completely hiding them from view. Then I began to scream. It was not a normal scream. It was a guttural, terrifying wail of absolute despair. I curled my body into a tight fetal position, rocking back and forth on the floor, tearing at my own hair with my bare hands. I forced myself to hyperventilate, taking short, ragged gasps of air until my vision actually began to blur. I started muttering frantically to myself, stringing together nonsensical, paranoid sentences. "They are watching me," I chanted, rocking violently. "The walls are closing in. I cannot breathe. Everything is slipping away." I knew exactly how I looked through that tiny, blinking red lens. I looked like a woman whose mind had completely and utterly fractured. I looked exactly like the broken, insane wife Jamal desperately needed me to be. The burner phone in my pocket buzzed twice, a quick coded sequence from Darius. It meant Jamal had logged off the live feed. He had seen enough to validate his twisted narrative. He had secured his daily dose of fabricated evidence. I stopped screaming instantly. I sat up in the perfectly quiet room, my heart still racing, wiped a stray tear from my cheek and smiled a cold, dangerous smile. Let the games begin. I took a moment to smooth out my tailored navy skirt, tucked the crumpled latex gloves safely deep into the bottom of my designer handbag, and walked out of the mahogany office as if absolutely nothing had happened. My performance was flawless. Jamal thought he was the director of this tragic play, but I had just hijacked the script. Sunday arrived with the suffocating humidity typical of an Atlanta summer afternoon. It was the day of my mother-in-law Shirley's annual post-church barbecue. Calling it a barbecue was a massive understatement. Shirley lived in a sprawling, gaudy McMansion in South Fulton, a house heavily mortgaged just to maintain the illusion of generational wealth. The driveway was already packed with leased luxury cars when Jamal and I pulled up. The sprawling backyard was filled with catered food stations, towering floral arrangements, and the elite members of her megachurch congregation. Shirley was holding court on the massive stone patio, wearing an oversized, ostentatious yellow sun hat and a silk dress that cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. As Jamal guided me through the crowd by the small of my back, playing the role of the protective, doting husband, I saw Shirley spot us. She immediately broke away from the senior pastor and practically glided over her eyes, scanning me with barely concealed contempt. "Look who finally decided to join us," Shirley announced, her voice booming loudly enough for the entire church committee to hear. "Jamal, baby, you look exhausted. Are you getting any sleep at all, dealing with everything at home?" She turned her sharp, judgmental gaze toward me. "Zoe, darling, you look incredibly pale today. Are you sure you are up for a social gathering? We all know how fragile your nerves have been lately. We are praying for your mental fortitude, sweetie." Several church elders nearby nodded in solemn, condescending agreement. The narrative had already been planted perfectly. They were laying the social groundwork for my impending institutionalization. I forced a tight, polite smile, digging my nails into the expensive leather of my clutch. "Thank you for your prayers, Shirley," I replied, my tone perfectly measured and sweet. "The Lord always reveals the truth in due time." Her fake smile faltered for a fraction of a second, unsettled by my absolute composure, before she quickly pivoted back to her audience, loudly offering them more catered shrimp. Jamal excused himself to greet a few investment bankers near the outdoor bar, leaving me isolated near the edge of the sparkling swimming pool. That was when my sister-in-law Keisha made her move. She strutted over in a pair of ridiculous red-bottom heels that were entirely inappropriate for a lawn party, carrying two tall crystal glasses filled with a vibrant orange cocktail. Her wrists sparkled with diamond tennis bracelets I knew for a fact were purchased on credit lines currently nearing default. "Here you go, Zoe," Keisha said, her voice dripping with fake sugary sweetness. "I had the bartender mix up something special just for you. A passion fruit mojito, to help you calm those awful nerves of yours. Jamal told me you had another one of your little episodes yesterday. You really need to relax." As she extended the glass toward me, I caught a brief, chilling interaction over her shoulder. Jamal was standing by the bar watching us intently. He caught the eye of Keisha and gave a nearly imperceptible approving nod. Keisha flashed a wicked, knowing smirk back at him. My blood turned to absolute ice. The drink was spiked. He had given her the heavy antipsychotic pills to slip into my cocktail, hoping to drug me into a stupor right in front of the entire gathered church congregation. It was a brilliantly cruel setup to prove I was mentally unfit in public. I took the glass from her manicured hand, smiling graciously. "Thank you, Keisha," I said smoothly. "You are always so incredibly thoughtful." She spun around and strutted back toward the patio, eager to watch the show. I held the icy glass, my mind calculating 1,000,000 miles an hour. I needed to dispose of the drink, but Jamal was still watching me from across the lawn. Then I saw Terrence, the husband of Keisha. He was sweating profusely despite the shade, pacing nervously near the buffet table and aggressively chewing his thumbnail. Terrence looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. I knew from Darius that Terrence was drowning in mob debt and desperate for Jamal to secure my trust fund. I walked purposefully toward the lavish buffet, holding my spiked drink. As I approached Terrence, I utilized every crowd control tactic I had mastered in my decade of public relations. I needed a flawless, chaotic distraction. I spotted a passing waiter carrying a massive silver tray of towering champagne flutes. I timed my steps perfectly and deliberately clipped the edge of the tray with my shoulder. The silver tray tipped, sending a cascade of sticky champagne and shattered glass crashing onto the expensive stone patio right at Terrence's feet. The sudden violent noise startled everyone in the immediate vicinity. Terrence jumped back, cursing loudly as champagne splashed across his designer loafers. Several guests gasped and rushed forward to help. In that fraction of a second of absolute, unadulterated chaos, while all eyes were locked on the broken glass and the apologizing waiter, I made my move. Terrence had placed his half-empty orange cocktail on the edge of the buffet table. With a swift, practiced motion, I placed my heavily drugged glass directly over the napkin where his drink had been and smoothly swept his untainted glass into my hand. I stepped back, blending seamlessly into the concerned crowd, and took a long, refreshing sip of Terrence's clean drink. I watched from the periphery as Terrence, still cursing about his ruined shoes, blindly grabbed the spiked cocktail I had left for him and downed the entire remaining contents in one massive, frustrated gulp. I offered a silent prayer, waiting for the heavy sedatives to take effect. 30 minutes passed in a haze of polite conversation and clinking glasses. The extravagant backyard party was in full swing. A live jazz band played softly near the pristine swimming pool, while wealthy church members mingled, completely unaware of the explosive drama brewing just beneath the surface. I maintained my flawless facade, gracefully accepting fake sympathy from manipulative women while keeping a very close, discreet eye on Terrence. The antipsychotic medication Jamal acquired from the dark web was designed to induce severe lethargy. However, Jamal had failed to account for a chemical variable. Terrence had been consuming dark liquor all afternoon to calm his anxiety regarding his mob debt. When the potent drugs violently collided with the alcohol in his bloodstream, the combination triggered a terrifying paradoxical reaction. Instead of passing out, Terrence spiraled into extreme mania. He stumbled forward violently, knocking over a heavy patio table. The loud crash silenced the jazz band instantly. Every single guest froze in absolute shock. Terrence lunged across the stone patio and grabbed Jamal. He screamed, "Jamal, you promised you would pay the debt. If the mob finds out about Jada's baby, we are all dead." I froze. Who is Jada? My mind rapidly raced through every single late night. He claimed to be working on massive investment portfolios. Every sudden weekend business trip, and all the mysterious hotel charges he constantly swore were corporate accounting errors. He was not just stealing my inheritance to save his family from loan sharks. He was funding a completely secret second life. Bedlam erupted across the pristine stone patio. Terrence was thrashing wildly, his eyes wide with drug-induced terror, screaming about hitmen and a baby that did not belong to him. Jamal lunged forward with terrifying speed. He tackled his brother-in-law around the waist, slamming him hard against a towering floral arrangement. Roses and shattered vases rained down on them. Jamal pinned Terrence to the ground, his face twisted in desperate fury, shouting to the horrified crowd that Terrence had mixed bad medication with top-shelf bourbon. Jamal ordered Keisha to help drag her thrashing husband into the guest pool house. I immediately dropped into character. I clutched the sides of my head, letting out a fragile sob, playing the role of the terrified, mentally unstable wife, completely overwhelmed by the sudden violence. But underneath my shaking hands, my phone was angled perfectly. I hit record. I captured every single frantic word Terrence screamed as Jamal dragged him across the grass. I captured Shirley rushing toward the church elders, desperately spinning lies about Terrence suffering a simple diabetic emergency. I captured the exact moment Jamal looked back over his shoulder, silently checking to ensure my fragile mind was sufficiently broken by the spectacle. I gave him a weak, terrified nod. He locked Terrence inside the pool house and slammed the heavy door shut. With the entire party focused on Shirley's frantic damage control and Keisha sobbing near the buffet, I made my move. I feigned a massive panic attack, gasping for air, and stumbled toward the front gates, telling a concerned church deacon that I simply needed to sit in my quiet car. The moment I slipped past the towering privacy hedges and into the sprawling driveway lined with luxury vehicles, my tears vanished instantly. My posture straightened. I marched directly toward Terrence's leased black SUV. Terrence was a sloppy, disorganized hustler. I knew from previous family dinners that he always kept his physical business documents hidden under the passenger seat of his car, paranoid that Keisha would find out how much money he was losing. I wrapped my hand in my silk scarf to avoid leaving fingerprints and pulled the door handle. It was unlocked. A rookie mistake by a man playing a high-level game. I slipped into the stifling heat of the vehicle, reached under the leather passenger seat, and pulled out a thick leather portfolio. My relentless climb up the corporate ladder had not just taught me how to manage public relations crises. Reviewing vendor agreements and massive hospital network mergers had taught me exactly how to speed read highly complex financial contracts. I knew precisely how to follow the money, bypassing the legal jargon to find the routing numbers, notarized stamps, and buried clauses. I opened the heavy leather flap and began rapidly scanning the stack of crisp white documents. The first page hit me like a physical punch. It was a finalized closing packet for a luxury real estate purchase, printed on heavy parchment paper. My eyes darted across the dense legal paragraphs, seeking out the crucial data points my career had trained me to identify. I flipped quickly to the property details. It was a sprawling $1.5 million penthouse located in an exclusive high-rise in downtown Miami. I turned to the wire transfer receipts stapled to the back of the packet. The deposit was enormous, $500,000 paid entirely in cash. I traced the routing numbers printed on the bank receipts, my breath catching as the truth materialized. The funds had been siphoned directly from a joint savings account I shared with Jamal. He had funneled the money quietly through the fraudulent shell company Terrence set up, moving it through obscure accounts, and washed it clean to look like a legitimate real estate investment. He was using his brother-in-law's mob-tied financial mess as a smokescreen to hide his massive theft. But Terrence was not listed anywhere on the property deed. Jamal was not listed on the deed alone either. There was a secondary cosigner listed as a joint tenant with full rights of survivorship. I stared at the bold, sweeping signature at the very bottom of the final page written in bright blue ink. Jada Washington. I pulled out my encrypted burner phone and rapidly typed the name into the secure network. Darius established for me. Within seconds, his highly advanced background algorithms pulled up her entire digital footprint, bypassing privacy settings with terrifying ease. Jada Washington was 23 years old. She was a former bottle service waitress at a notoriously upscale Atlanta nightclub, a place Jamal frequently visited with his elite investment banking colleagues. I scrolled frantically through her social media profiles. Staring back at me from the glowing screen was a stunning, vibrant young black woman, posing effortlessly in front of incredibly expensive restaurants, sipping vintage champagne and sitting casually in the soft leather passenger seat of Jamal's custom-ordered sports car. She was living the life my money was secretly funding. But the most recent photograph uploaded to her account made my blood turn to absolute ice. Jada was standing in front of a massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sparkling turquoise Miami Ocean. She was wearing a tight designer maternity dress, her hands gently cradling a very prominent, undeniably large baby bump. The caption underneath the picture read, "6 months down, 3 to go, until our little prince finally arrives. Daddy is working hard to make sure we have the absolute perfect castle waiting for us." I felt a wave of profound nausea wash over me. I sat frozen in the sweltering heat of Terrence's SUV, the heavy leather portfolio resting heavily on my lap. I felt the crushing weight of the ultimate betrayal settling into my bones. Jamal was not just a greedy husband trying to steal my inheritance to save his pathetic brother-in-law from dangerous loan sharks. He was actively financing a completely secret second family, using the exact money my deceased father had worked his entire life to secure for my future safety. Jamal was meticulously planning to lock me inside a sterile, terrifying psychiatric ward. He intended to ruthlessly strip away my basic human rights, declare me legally incompetent, and drain my massive bank accounts completely dry, just so he could play house in a Miami penthouse with a pregnant 23-year-old waitress. The utter depravity of his master plan was almost too massive for my brain to comprehend. I carefully placed the closing documents back into the heavy leather portfolio, making absolutely certain they were arranged exactly as I had originally found them. I slid the thick folder deep under the passenger seat, pushing it out of sight. I wiped down the interior and exterior door handles with my silk scarf, ensuring I left zero physical evidence of my intrusion, and stepped out of the vehicle. The heavy, humid Atlanta air hit my face, but I felt absolutely nothing. I was numb. I needed to get back to the bustling stone patio before Jamal realized I had been gone for too long. I needed to continue playing the broken, heavily medicated wife. I needed to look him in the eye and smile at the very man who was actively attempting to destroy my entire existence. I walked briskly down the long paved driveway, heading toward my own sleek car parked near the privacy gate to grab my emergency makeup kit. I urgently needed to reapply my ruined mascara and powder my face to maintain the fragile illusion of my recent panic attack. I rounded the sharp corner of the towering privacy hedges, my mind already calculating my next strategic move. But my purposeful footsteps faltered instantly. My heart slammed violently against my ribcage, freezing the blood in my veins. Leaning casually against the driver's side door of my dark sedan was a young woman. She was wearing a tight beige designer maternity dress that perfectly accentuated her 6-month baby bump. She was casually sipping from a bottle of expensive sparkling water, her dark glossy hair cascading over her shoulders in flawless, expensive extensions. It was Jada Washington. She was standing boldly on my mother-in-law's property. She watched me approach with a cold, predatory smirk spreading across her painted lips. She did not look intimidated by my presence. She looked utterly triumphant. As I stopped 3 feet away from her, paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her presence at this family gathering, Jada leaned forward slowly. Her dark, calculating eyes locked directly onto mine, shining with wicked, victorious malice. "Jamal says you are going into an asylum by Friday," she whispered, her voice dripping with cruel, honeyed poison. I am just here to measure the drapes. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the heavy Atlanta air. A younger, more naive version of myself might have screamed. I might have slapped her perfectly contoured face or dragged her by those expensive extensions across the manicured lawn. But I am a public relations executive. I deal with hostile takeovers and crisis management for breakfast. Screaming is for people who have lost control. I was just getting started. I looked at Jada Washington. I looked at the prominent curve of her stomach carrying my husband's secret child. Then I smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was a dead, terrifying, hollow smile that did not reach my eyes. It was the smile of a predator that had just locked the cage door from the inside. Take your time measuring, Jada, I said, my voice dropping to a chilling, perfectly calm whisper. Make sure you get the exact dimensions. You are going to need a lot of fabric to cover up the ugly truth. Her smug expression faltered instantly. The triumphant gleam in her eyes flickered into genuine uncertainty as I turned my back on her, slid into the cool leather seat of my sedan, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. I did not speed. I drove exactly the speed limit, my hands gripping the steering wheel with absolute terrifying precision. The tears were gone. The shock was gone. Only a cold clinical executioner remained. As soon as I hit the highway, I connected my encrypted phone to the car's Bluetooth and dialed the only person who could match my current level of ruthless calculation. Chloe was my college roommate, and currently the most feared corporate litigator in the state of Georgia. She destroyed predatory CEOs for a living. She answered on the second ring. I need you, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Jamal is trying to steal my trust fund to pay off Terrence's mob debt. He has a pregnant mistress. He bought a luxury condo in Miami, using my money, and he is actively drugging my food with heavy antipsychotics to file for a medical conservatorship. I need to gut him financially and legally, and I need to do it by Friday. There was a beat of absolute silence on the other end of the line. When Chloe finally spoke, her voice was sharp, professional, and dripping with anticipated violence. Meet me at my office in 20 minutes. Bring every single piece of data Darius has pulled. We are going to war. I arrived at Chloe's downtown firm, bypassing the receptionist and walking straight into her expansive corner office. Darius was already there, his heavily modified laptop open on the massive glass conference table. For the next 3 hours, we transformed her office into a war room. We mapped out Jamal's entire criminal conspiracy on a whiteboard, connecting the fraudulent shell company, the stolen funds, the dark web pharmaceutical purchases, and the Miami real estate deed. Jamal thinks he is playing chess, Chloe said, pacing the room in her sharp designer heels. But he is legally sloppy. He is leaving digital fingerprints everywhere because he assumes you are too medicated to notice. If he wants a conservatorship, he has to prove you are an immediate danger to yourself or your estate. He needs a medical professional to sign off on a psychiatric evaluation, and he needs you to sign a durable power of attorney while you are incapacitated. Darius hit a key on his laptop, bringing up a newly intercepted email from Jamal's cloned phone. He is bringing the medical professional to the house tomorrow evening, Darius announced, his eyes scanning the intercepted text. Jamal just confirmed an appointment with a Dr. Vance. The email says Vance will conduct an in-home assessment to evaluate your deteriorating cognitive state. Chloe narrowed her sharp eyes. No reputable psychiatrist does covert ambushed in-home assessments for a conservatorship without a court order. Darius, dig into this, Dr. Vance. I want his entire professional history on my desk by tomorrow morning. If Jamal is bringing him into your home, we need to know exactly who we are dealing with. And the power of attorney, I asked, looking at Chloe. If I refuse to sign it, he will just forge my signature or drug me until I am completely unresponsive. You are not going to refuse, Chloe said, a wicked, brilliant smile spreading across her face. You are going to sign exactly what he puts in front of you. But Jamal is going to learn a very painful lesson about corporate contract law. I am going to draft a custom post-nuptial agreement. It will be formatted to look exactly like a standard Georgia medical and financial power of attorney. We are going to swap the middle pages of his binder. When Jamal countersigns the document as the acting agent, he will actually be signing away 100% of his current and future assets to you in the event of documented financial fraud. The sheer brilliance of the trap was breathtaking. But how do we swap the pages? I asked. He will be watching me like a hawk. Leave the sleight of hand to me, Chloe replied smoothly. I will be in the house. The next evening, the heavy Atlanta humidity clung to the windows of our suburban mansion. I was wearing oversized sweatpants and an old t-shirt, my hair deliberately messy. I sat on the edge of the plush living room sofa, staring blankly at the wall, playing the role of a woman whose mind was slowly unraveling. Jamal walked through the front door, loosening his expensive silk tie. Behind him was a tall, distinguished-looking older man carrying a leather medical bag. "Zoe, sweetheart," Jamal said, his voice dripping with that fake, suffocating concern. "This is Dr. Vance. I asked him to come by and check on you. You have been so confused lately, and I am just terrified about your well-being. I want to make sure you are getting the right help." Dr. Vance stepped forward, offering a warm, practiced, and entirely fraudulent smile. "Hello, Zoe. Jamal has told me you are experiencing some significant memory gaps and emotional distress. I am just here to ask a few simple questions. Nothing to worry about." My burner phone, tucked securely under the sofa cushion, vibrated with a text from Darius. I already knew what it said because Darius had briefed me an hour ago. Dr. Vance was not a psychiatrist. He was a disgraced former plastic surgeon who lost his medical license 5 years ago for orchestrating a massive Medicare billing fraud scheme. He was currently heavily in debt and secretly employed by Terrence's shady real estate LLC to sign off on bogus injury claims. Jamal had literally hired a criminal fraudster to declare me legally insane. I looked at the fake doctor, letting my lower lip tremble violently. "I am just so tired," I whispered, forcing a look of utter defeat. "I cannot remember where I put things. My head is always spinning. Jamal says I am losing my mind, and I think he might be right." Jamal knelt beside the sofa, taking my hand in his. He looked up at the fake doctor with an expression of manufactured heartbreak. "It is getting worse every day, doctor. I am trying to manage her PR firm, the household, and her medical care, but she is becoming a danger to her own finances. Yesterday, she almost wired our savings to a scammer because she was so confused." The audacity of his lie was staggering. He was actively setting the narrative to justify the missing $500,000 he had already stolen for Jada's Miami penthouse. Dr. Vance nodded solemnly, pulling a thick black binder from his leather bag. "Given her current state of severe cognitive decline, it is imperative that we protect her assets and ensure her medical continuity. Jamal, as her husband, and you need to assume immediate legal control to relieve her of this overwhelming burden. I have prepared the standard durable power of attorney documents. Once she signs, I will provide my medical endorsement for the conservatorship filing." Jamal placed the thick black binder on the heavy oak coffee table in front of me. He handed me a sleek silver fountain pen. "Zoe, baby, I know this is scary, but I love you so much. I promise I will take care of everything. You just need to rest your beautiful mind. Sign the papers and I will handle the rest." I stared at the thick stack of legal documents. My hand trembled, playing the victim perfectly, but my mind was hyper-aware of the slight creak of the floorboards in the adjacent dining room. Chloe had slipped through the back patio door 10 minutes ago. She was waiting in the shadows, just out of sight. "I need a glass of water," I whimpered, letting the pen drop onto the table. "My throat is so dry I cannot even swallow. Please, Jamal." Jamal sighed, a flash of genuine annoyance breaking through his caring facade. "Of course, baby. Dr. Vance, would you care for a water as well?" The fake doctor nodded and Jamal turned his back, walking swiftly toward the open kitchen. The second they crossed the threshold into the kitchen, Chloe moved with the silent, lethal speed of a striking viper. She stepped out from the dining room shadows, reached across the coffee table, and deftly unclipped the metal rings of the black binder. She slid out the center pages of Jamal's standard power of attorney and replaced them instantly with the identical-looking pages of her custom-drafted aggressive post-nuptial agreement. She clipped the binder shut, gave me a sharp acknowledging nod, and melted silently back into the dark hallway before Jamal and the fake doctor even turned around from the refrigerator. Jamal returned, handing me a glass of ice water. "Here you go, sweetheart. Drink up and then let us get this taken care of." I took a slow sip, letting the cold water ground me. I picked up the silver fountain pen. I did not hesitate. I did not fumble. I signed my name flawlessly on the signature line of the final page, my handwriting sharp, clear, and perfectly legally binding. I pushed the binder across the table toward my husband. "I trust you, Jamal," I whispered, looking deep into his lying, deceitful eyes. "I know you will get exactly what you deserve." Jamal smiled a wide, triumphant, predatory smile. He had won. He had defeated the wealthy, independent wife and secured his key to a $4 million empire. He eagerly took the silver pen from my hand, flipped to the final page, and confidently scrawled his own bold signature on the countersign line, officially finalizing the document as the acting agent. He closed the heavy black binder with a loud, satisfying snap. "Thank you, Zoe," he said, his voice dripping with victorious satisfaction. "You did the right thing." I watched him hand the binder back to the fake doctor. He had no idea what he had just done. He thought he had just signed away my freedom. He did not realize he had just legally signed away every single asset, bank account, and property he would ever own. But the trap was not fully sprung yet. He still thought the money was waiting for him, and the ultimate public destruction was yet to come. The heavy front door clicked shut, sealing Jamal and his fake doctor outside in the humid Atlanta night. I sat perfectly still on the living room sofa for exactly 60 seconds, listening to the muffled roar of his luxury sedan engine fading down the street. The moment the sound vanished, the stifling atmosphere of the house broke. Chloe stepped out from the darkened dining room hallway, holding the heavy black binder tightly against her chest. She let out a sharp, breathless laugh, her professional composure finally cracking into a wide, triumphant grin. I stood up, the fog of the fake drugged stupor vanishing from my posture instantly. I smoothed out my sweatpants and walked over to the wet bar to pour us both a glass of sparkling water. My hands were perfectly steady. "Tell me it worked." "It worked," I said, handing her a crystal glass. Chloe opened the binder and flipped to the final page. She traced her perfectly manicured finger over Jamal's bold, arrogant signature. "It worked flawlessly," she said, her voice vibrating with intense satisfaction. He did not even glance at the header text on the preceding pages. He was too blinded by his own greed. I looked down at the document that was about to obliterate my husband's life. What Jamal thought he countersigned was a standard Georgia medical and financial power of attorney. He believed he had just legally assumed total control over my physical autonomy and my $4 million trust fund. In reality, he had just signed an ironclad, aggressively structured post-nuptial agreement. Chloe had spent 48 hours drafting this masterpiece of corporate litigation. The document explicitly stated that in the event of any documented financial fraud, marital asset diversion, or criminal conspiracy against me, Jamal immediately forfeited 100% of his current and future assets. The agreement covered his investment portfolios, his retirement accounts, the equity in our home, and any real estate holdings secretly purchased using marital funds. "He just handed you the keys to his entire kingdom," Chloe whispered, snapping the binder shut. "The moment we prove his fraud, he walks away with absolutely nothing, not a single dime." I took a slow sip of my water, savoring the cold clarity of the moment. We had the legal trap set and fully armed. Now we just needed Jamal to commit the ultimate act of financial treason. We needed him to attempt the massive wire transfer. The following morning, I stayed in bed playing the role of the heavily sedated, deteriorating wife. Jamal kissed my forehead before leaving for his corporate office downtown, his step unusually light and energetic. The second his car left the driveway, I was on my secure burner phone with my brother. Darius had been awake all night, monitoring the mirrored banking application he had successfully installed on my cloned device. "Hi is logging in right now," Darius announced, his voice crackling with pure adrenaline over the encrypted line. I am watching his screen share. Hi is bypassing your primary security questions using the answers he photographed from your biometric safe. I sat at my kitchen island, opening my laptop to watch the secure live feed Darius was broadcasting to me. I could see an exact replica of Jamal's office computer screen. He was navigating swiftly through the complex interface of my high-yield trust fund account. He did not hesitate. He entered the master routing numbers for an offshore holding account located in the Cayman Islands. He typed in the transfer amount, $4 million. He was trying to drain every single cent my late father had left me. "Let him hit execute," I ordered quietly. On the screen, Jamal's cursor hovered over the bright green confirmation button. I held my breath. The cursor clicked. A loading circle appeared on the screen, spinning for 5 agonizing seconds. Then a massive green checkmark illuminated the display. Transfer successful. My burner phone buzzed. Darius had intercepted Jamal's outgoing phone call. He was calling his sister Keisha. Darius routed the live audio directly into my... I got it! Jamal practically shouted into the phone, his voice echoing with manic relief and greedy celebration. The transfer just cleared. $4 million is sitting safe and sound offshore. We are completely in the clear. I could hear Keisha screaming with joy on the other end of the line. Oh my goodness, Jamal, she shrieked. I told you this would work. You are a genius. Terrence is going to cry when I tell him. We can finally pay off those dangerous guys from the real estate deal, and I can stop pretending to be broke. I am going shopping right now to celebrate. I will transfer Terrence his $2 million by tomorrow morning, Jamal promised, laughing loudly. Just keep playing your part at the gala this weekend. Make sure everyone at the church knows Zoe is losing her mind. When I commit her on Friday, I need 0 questions asked. Consider it done, little brother, Keisha said maliciously. Enjoy your new life in Miami. The line went dead. I pulled the earpiece out and stared at my laptop screen. A cold, dangerous calm settled over my entire body. I unmuted my connection to my brother. Darius, I said smoothly. Tell me you caught it. Me. Darius let out a low, dark chuckle. I caught it in midair, sis. He thinks the money moved, but his screen is just displaying a cached simulation I coded last night. Your $4 million never left your heavily encrypted local trust account. It is locked down tighter than Fort Knox. And his money? I asked, leaning forward. Darius's keyboard clattered rapidly through the speakers. That is the beautiful part, Darius explained. When Jamal hit the execute button, he unknowingly triggered a reverse routing protocol I embedded in the Mirror app. Instead of moving your money to his offshore account, the system grabbed his personal hidden investment accounts. The accounts he was using to hide the stolen funds for the Miami penthouse and Terrence's mob debt. Where did you send his money? I asked, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. I routed every single dime of Jamal's liquid assets directly into an active Internal Revenue Service criminal fraud holding account. Darius said, his voice brimming with pride. I attached an anonymous, highly detailed whistleblower dossier flagging the funds as suspected money laundering connected to organized crime. The federal system automatically triggered a massive security freeze. Jamal, Keisha, and Terrence currently have 0 access to their banking network, their credit cards, their savings, their checking accounts. It is all completely frozen pending a massive federal investigation. They are completely broke and they do not even know it yet. They were celebrating a victory that did not exist. They were dancing on the deck of a rapidly sinking ship. I thanked my brother and closed my laptop. The financial execution was flawless. Now it was time for the social consequences to begin their brutal cascade. Across town, in the heart of the ultra-wealthy Buckhead shopping district, Keisha was already putting her catastrophic ignorance on full display. Believing that her brother had just secured $4 million, she strutted into one of the most exclusive high-end jewelry boutiques in the entire city. She was wearing her best designer knockoffs, projecting the image of a wealthy, untouchable Atlanta socialite. Darius had tapped into the boutique's security network, allowing us to monitor the audio and video of the transaction in real time. We watched as Keisha haughtily demanded the manager bring out their most exclusive pieces. She spent an hour trying on various extravagant items, loudly bragging to the terrified sales associates about the massive upcoming charity gala she was attending this weekend. She needed something that would make every other woman in her megachurch absolutely sick with jealousy. She finally settled on a breathtaking heavy diamond collar necklace. The retail price was $20,000. It was a grotesque display of gluttony, funded by what she believed was my stolen inheritance. I will take it, Keisha announced loudly, waving her manicured hand with dismissive arrogance. Ring it up quickly. I have a very busy afternoon ahead of me. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a sleek, heavy metal credit card. It was a card linked directly to Jamal's hidden accounts, the very accounts he used to siphon money from my joint savings to fund his secret life in Miami. She slapped the metal card onto the glass display counter. The boutique manager, a sharply dressed woman with impeccable manners, picked up the card and inserted it into the secure terminal. Keisha stood at the counter examining her reflection in a silver mirror, already imagining the envy of her peers. The terminal beeped. It was a harsh, flat negative sound. The manager frowned slightly and tried the card a second time. The machine beeped again, louder this time. The manager looked at the computer screen, her polite customer service smile instantly vanishing, replaced by a look of profound, genuine alarm. She took a slow step back from the counter, her eyes darting nervously toward the large security guard standing near the front entrance of the boutique. "Is there a problem?" Keisha snapped, crossing her arms impatiently. "Run it again. The machine is probably just acting up. Do you know who I am?" The manager looked at Keisha, her voice dropping to a serious, uncompromising tone that echoed clearly through the quiet, luxurious boutique. "Ma'am," the manager said, holding the metal card up cautiously, "I cannot run this card again. The system is refusing to return it. This account has been permanently locked and flagged by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for suspected federal wire fraud. I am required by law to confiscate this card immediately, and I have to ask you to step away from the merchandise right now." Keisha's jaw dropped open in absolute, unadulterated horror as her fake wealth finally collapsed entirely today. She snatched her hand back from the glass counter, as if the credit card had suddenly caught fire. The boutique manager stared at her with a mixture of professional duty and thinly veiled judgment. Keisha did not try to argue or demand to speak to regional management. She knew exactly what a federal fraud flag meant. Her lungs tightened, restricting her oxygen as she spun around on her towering red-bottom heels and sprinted toward the heavy glass doors. She ignored the confused stares of the wealthy Buckhead shoppers bursting out onto the sweltering sidewalk. The boutique manager crossed her arms over her chest, signaling the towering security guard standing by the entrance to move closer. Keisha felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had spent the last 5 years carefully constructing an illusion of massive wealth, relying entirely on her brother's financial manipulations to fund her lavish lifestyle. Now, standing on the hot pavement, that entire fake empire felt like it was crumbling into dust. Her manicured fingers shook violently as she pulled out her phone and dialed her brother. Jamal answered on the first ring, still riding the high of his supposed financial victory. Jamal, Keisha gasped, leaning heavily against a brick wall in the alleyway behind the shopping center. The card declined. The manager said the federal authorities flagged the account for wire fraud. They confiscated the metal card right out of my hand. What is going on? Jamal let out a long, heavy sigh over the phone, completely unbothered by her panic. "Keisha, calm down and listen to me," Jamal said smoothly. "I just transferred $4 million across international borders into an offshore Cayman holding account. Of course, the federal algorithms temporarily locked the domestic cards. It is a standard automated security measure for massive offshore movement. The money is perfectly safe. It is sitting exactly where I put it. We just need to wait 48 hours for the international clearing process to complete and the domestic security flags to reset. Go home, drink a glass of wine, and get ready for the gala. We have a major performance to deliver this weekend." The performance Jamal was referring to was the annual Black Excellence Gala in downtown Atlanta. It was the absolute pinnacle of the high society calendar, a lavish event where the most powerful politicians, corporate executives, and cultural influencers gathered to celebrate their collective achievements. Everyone who was anyone would be in attendance. Jamal, myself, Shirley, Keisha, and Terrence were all scheduled to sit at a prime table near the main stage. For Jamal, this gala was not just a social obligation. It was the crucial final stage of his sinister master plan. He had been quietly laying the groundwork for weeks, whispering to his elite colleagues and our wealthy neighbors about my supposedly deteriorating mental condition. Tonight, he planned to use this incredibly public forum to deliver the final crushing blow. Under the guise of a loving, heartbroken husband, he intended to stand before Atlanta's elite and announce my immediate retirement from my corporate vice president position due to severe mental health struggles. He wanted to establish an airtight alibi, cementing the tragic narrative that I was losing my mind. Once he established that public record, committing me to a psychiatric facility on Friday morning would look like an act of profound mercy rather than a hostile financial takeover. He wanted a standing ovation, right, for stealing my life. The ballroom inside the Ritz-Carlton had been transformed into a breathtaking display of opulence. Thousands of white orchids draped from the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the meticulously arranged tables. Dozens of highly trained event staff moved silently through the room, carrying silver trays loaded with premium champagne and exquisite hors d'oeuvres. It was the perfect stage for a monumental deception. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in our master bedroom, applying the final touches to my makeup. I did not look like a woman on the verge of a mental breakdown. I looked like absolute untouchable royalty. I had commissioned a stunning custom-made emerald green silk gown specifically for tonight. The rich fabric draped perfectly across my figure, radiating power, elegance, and lethal confidence. I fastened a pair of diamond drop earrings that had belonged to my late father, feeling his protective presence surrounding me. Jamal walked into the expansive master suite wearing a flawlessly tailored black velvet tuxedo. He stopped in his tracks, genuinely momentarily stunned by my appearance. "You look absolutely breathtaking, Zoe," he murmured, stepping close behind me and resting his heavy hands on my bare shoulders. He met my eyes in the mirror, flashing that charismatic, predatory smile. "Are you sure you are feeling up to this tonight? We can always stay home if your mind is feeling too foggy." I reached up and gently patted his hand, matching his fake devotion with my own calculated performance. "I would not miss tonight for the world, Jamal. I am feeling much clearer today. I think tonight is going to be a night everyone remembers for a very long time." He kissed the side of my neck, completely oblivious to the fact that he was embracing his own executioner. "Excellent," he whispered. "Let us go show everyone how strong we are together." We rode to the luxury hotel in the back of a chauffeured black town car. Jamal held my hand the entire way, casually chatting about the networking he planned to do during the cocktail hour. I simply nodded and smiled, watching the glittering city lights pass by my window. My burner phone, securely tucked inside my emerald clutch, vibrated once. A quick message from Darius confirming that our final pieces were perfectly in place. The digital traps were primed, the evidence was loaded, and the federal agents were quietly on standby. Chloe was already inside the venue, sipping a martini and waiting for the fireworks to begin. The humid southern air in Atlanta clung to my skin, but I felt absolutely nothing except cold, hard anticipation. Every single step I took tonight had been calculated with lethal precision. There was no room for error and no capacity for mercy. The time for being the quiet, accommodating wife had officially expired. The town car pulled up to the grand entrance of the five-star hotel. A massive crowd of photographers and local media lined the velvet ropes of the red carpet. Bright, loud flashes of light illuminated the humid night air as Atlanta's elite stepped out of their vehicles in clouds of expensive perfume and tailored silk. Jamal stepped out first, buttoning his tuxedo jacket, then turned to offer me his hand. I emerged from the vehicle, immediately commanding the attention of the flashing cameras. Jamal wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, leaning in close to project the image of a fiercely protective husband shielding his vulnerable wife. We began our slow walk down the long red carpet, pausing every few steps to smile for the society photographers. Shirley, Keisha, and Terrence were waiting for us near the grand entrance doors. Shirley was wearing an obnoxious silver sequined dress, her face set in a look of haughty superiority. Keisha looked visibly anxious, her eyes darting around the crowd, clearly still rattled by the terrifying incident at the jewelry boutique. Terrence looked physically ill, sweating profusely through his rented tuxedo, constantly checking his phone for updates from the dangerous men who were demanding their $2 million tonight. As we approached the end of the red carpet, I allowed my gaze to drift toward the VIP check-in desk positioned just inside the opulent glass doors. The hostess was handing a glossy gold lanyard to a young, stunningly beautiful woman with long dark hair. She was wearing a form-fitting, shimmering champagne-colored maternity dress that clearly highlighted her prominent 6-month baby bump. It was Jada Washington. She turned around, her dark eyes scanning the crowded lobby until they landed directly on Jamal. A bright, expectant smile spread across her face. Jamal froze completely. His arm, still wrapped tightly around my waist, suddenly turned as rigid as solid stone. I felt his entire body go cold. The color instantly drained from his handsome face, leaving him looking sickly and terrified. His breathing hitched, catching sharply in his throat as he stared at his secret pregnant mistress, standing right in the middle of the most important social event of his entire life. I leaned my head gently against his broad shoulder, keeping my face angled perfectly toward the flashing cameras so they could capture my serene, loving smile. I pressed my lips right next to his ear, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling whisper. "Do not worry, honey," I murmured softly. "I sent her a VIP ticket myself. I thought she should definitely be here for your big speech." Jamal stumbled mid-step. His expensive Italian leather shoe caught sharply on the thick red carpet. I felt the powerful muscles in his back completely lock up under his velvet tuxedo jacket. He turned his head slowly, his eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. He looked from my serene, perfectly contoured face back toward the VIP check-in desk. Jada was still standing there, rubbing her prominent belly, completely oblivious to the catastrophic collision of worlds about to occur. She was searching the crowded lobby for him, expecting the wealthy, available man who had promised her a luxury life in Miami. Jamal swallowed hard, a thick bead of cold sweat forming at his dark hairline. He tried to speak, but his throat was entirely dry. He choked on his own breath. I simply smiled brighter for the flashing cameras gripping his arm tighter, forcing him to keep moving forward into the grand ballroom. We could not cause a scene in the lobby. That was not part of my plan. I needed him inside the main event, surrounded by his peers, his family, and his inescapable lies. The ballroom was a masterpiece of Atlanta high society. Jazz music floated through the air, mixing with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted filet mignon. Jamal guided me to our reserved table right at the front of the stage. He was sweating bullets, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy double doors every few seconds. He was desperately trying to calculate how to keep his pregnant mistress and his wealthy wife on opposite sides of the massive room. I accepted a crystal flute of champagne from a passing waiter and took a delicate sip, playing the role of the quiet, fragile wife to absolute perfection. Across the round table sat my mother-in-law, Shirley. She was in her element, holding court like a reigning queen. Seated next to her was the mayor of Atlanta and three senior elders from her megachurch. Shirley leaned in closely to the mayor, her voice deliberately loud enough for our entire side of the room to hear. She placed a dramatic hand on her chest. "It has been such a heavy burden on our family," Shirley announced, shaking her head sorrowfully. "My poor daughter-in-law, Zoe, is just not herself anymore. Her mind is completely slipping away. It breaks my heart to see her so unfit. But my Jamal is a saint. He is stepping up to take full legal control of her finances and medical care next week. He is saving her from herself. The Lord really blessed that boy with a servant's heart." The church elders nodded in solemn agreement, murmuring their approval of Jamal's supposed sacrifice. I kept my eyes lowered, sipping my champagne, letting her dig the grave deeper with every single arrogant word. Let her boast. Let her establish the lie in front of the most powerful people in the city. It would only make the impending truth that much more devastating. While Shirley boasted, Terrence was actively falling apart 2 seats away. He was downing his third glass of straight bourbon, his hands shaking so violently that the ice cubes rattled against the glass. He kept pulling out his phone, staring at the screen with wide, bloodshot eyes. Darius had tapped into the local cell towers and was routing Terrence's text messages directly to my secure burner phone hidden in my clutch. The messages were coming from an untraceable number. "We know you are at the gala, Terrence. $2 million by midnight or we start visiting your family. Do not make us come inside." Terrence was suffocating under the weight of his mob debts, entirely dependent on the $4 million Jamal had supposedly transferred offshore that morning. He had absolutely no idea that the money he was desperately waiting for was currently sitting in a frozen federal holding account. Jamal stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need to speak with the event coordinator, he stammered, pulling at his stiff collar. He was making a desperate run for the lobby to intercept Jada before she could enter the ballroom. But he was exactly 2 minutes too late. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the room swung open. Jada Washington walked in, completely ignoring the event staff trying to check her seating assignment. She spotted Jamal standing near our table at the front of the room. A massive, relieved smile spread across her beautiful face. She began walking directly toward us, her champagne-colored maternity dress clinging tightly to her 6-month baby bump. Jamal froze in pure terror. He looked at me, then at his mother, then at the approaching mistress. He was completely trapped. Jada reached our table just as the first course was being served. She marched right up to Jamal, crossing her arms over her chest, visibly annoyed by his lack of a welcoming embrace. "Jamal, why are you ignoring my texts?" Jada demanded, her voice carrying sharply over the soft jazz music. "I have been calling you all day. The real estate agent needs the final confirmation for the Miami condo. When exactly are we moving our things down there? You promised me we would be settling into the nursery by next week." The silence that fell over our table was absolute and suffocating. Terrence dropped his bourbon glass onto the table, the amber liquid spilling across the crisp white linen tablecloth. Shirley's arrogant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer horror. She stared at the young, beautiful pregnant woman, demanding answers from her perfect, saintly son. "Excuse me, young lady," Shirley gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. "Who exactly are you, and why are you speaking to my married son about a condo in Miami?" Jada finally turned her attention to Shirley, looking her up and down with intense disrespect. "I am Jada," she announced proudly, resting her hands on her pregnant belly. "And I am carrying his son. Jamal told me his wife was going into an asylum on Friday, so we are moving to Florida to start our real family. Now who are you?" Shirley let out a strangled, breathless sound that resembled a dying animal. She clutched her chest, her eyes bulging out of her head as she looked at Jamal for a denial that was never going to come. The church elders began whispering frantically among themselves. The pristine, holy image of the perfect family was violently fracturing in front of the most elite circles in Atlanta. Keisha, who had just returned from the restroom, stopped dead in her tracks, staring at Jada in absolute shock. Jamal was drowning. His entire secret life was colliding with his public facade in real time. He looked at me, his eyes begging for me to intervene, to cause a distraction, to do anything to save him. I simply raised my crystal champagne flute toward him, offering a small, mocking toast, and took another slow, deliberate sip. I was not going to save him. I was going to watch him burn. Realizing that his mother was about to scream, and his mistress was refusing to leave, Jamal did the only thing his panicked, narcissistic brain could think of. He needed to seize control of the narrative before the whispers spreading around our table infected the entire ballroom. He needed a microphone. He needed to execute his master plan right now. Jamal turned and sprinted toward the main stage at the front of the ballroom. He bounded up the carpeted stairs, waving off the event host. Jamal rushed to the gleaming acrylic podium and grabbed the heavy microphone. He tapped the metal grill of the microphone twice, the sharp, amplified sound echoing loudly through the massive vaulted room. The jazz band immediately stopped playing. 500 of Atlanta's most influential citizens turned their attention to the handsome, sweating investment banker standing under the bright stage lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jamal began, his voice shaking slightly, "I am so sorry to interrupt this beautiful evening. Please forgive me. But I have a truly heartbreaking announcement to make tonight regarding my beautiful wife, Zoe." He paused, looking down at his hands, playing the role of the devastated, broken husband fighting back tears. He needed them to buy the massive lie. He looked up toward the darkened sound booth located on the second-floor balcony at the back of the room. He gave a sharp, frantic hand signal, the cue to play the emotional, carefully curated slideshow of our 5-year marriage. But the technician Jamal had paid was not sitting in the sound booth tonight. My younger brother Darius was sitting right there, his fingers hovering over the master controls. And Darius was not going to play a slideshow of our happy marriage. Darius was about to play the absolute truth on the biggest screen in the entire city. Darius sat in the dark, elevated sound booth, bathed in the blue glow of his heavily modified laptop. He did not play the heartwarming slideshow of our 5-year marriage that Jamal had meticulously curated. Darius bypassed the hotel's audiovisual system completely. He hit the execute command on his keyboard, launching the high-definition video file I had captured just 2 days ago. The massive cinema-quality projector screen, hanging directly behind the stage, illuminated the entire ballroom in a stark, bright, clinical white light. The soft jazz music cut out instantly. 500 of Atlanta's most elite citizens, politicians, CEOs, and church elders stared at the massive screen, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. The video filled the screen. It was crystal clear, raw 4K footage captured from the microscopic hidden camera Jamal himself had installed in his mahogany home office. But the footage was not of me acting like a lunatic. Darius had hacked the cloud storage and retrieved the unedited footage of what happened right before Jamal walked into my home office. The camera angle showed Jamal standing by the massive marble kitchen island. The footage showed him clear as day, crushing a heavy, chalky white pill with the back of a silver spoon and meticulously stirring the toxic powder into my glass of expensive red wine and my plate of seafood pasta. The audio was pristine, capturing the sharp scrape of metal against marble. The entire ballroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop in the massive, opulent space. Jamal stood at the acrylic podium, his back to the screen, completely unaware of what the entire room was watching. He looked out at the silent, horrified crowd, misinterpreting their stunned silence for deep, sympathetic attention. He gripped the edges of the podium, preparing to deliver his rehearsed, tear-jerking monologue about my tragic mental decline. Before he could utter a single deceitful syllable, Darius triggered the next piece of digital evidence. The screen went black, and the massive surround sound speakers mounted around the ballroom crackled to life. It was the pristine audio recording I had captured on my phone during the backyard barbecue, exactly when Jamal tackled a manic Terrence to the ground. Terrence's frantic, drug-fueled voice echoed through the silent Ritz-Carlton ballroom, booming with terrifying clarity. "Jamal, you promised you would pay the debt. If the mob finds out about Jada's baby, we are all dead." The audio cut to Keisha's voice, sharp and malicious, recorded during her intercepted phone call with Jamal just 24 hours ago. "The transfer just cleared," Keisha shrieked through the speakers, her voice dripping with greedy excitement. $4 million is sitting safe and sound offshore. We can finally pay off those dangerous guys from the real estate deal. Just keep playing your part at the gala this weekend. Make sure everyone at the church knows Zoe is losing her mind. When you commit her on Friday, I need 0 questions asked." Then Jamal's own voice echoed through the ballroom, sealing his total destruction. "Consider it done, little sister." Jamal laughed maliciously over the speakers. "Enjoy your new life in Miami." Jamal froze. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. His hands trembled violently on the clear acrylic podium. The microphone slipped from his grasp, tumbling to the carpeted stage with a loud, piercing electronic screech of feedback that made several guests wince. He finally turned his head slowly, looking over his shoulder at the massive screen projecting his own damning words. I stood up from my seat at the front table. I did not scream. I did not throw my drink. I did not act like the hysterical, broken wife he had desperately tried to portray me as. I stood tall, my posture impeccable, the emerald green silk of my gown catching the stage lights. I looked like an absolute queen standing over the ruins of a conquered kingdom. "You wanted to talk about my mental health tonight, Jamal," I said. My voice was completely calm, devoid of any anger or sorrow. The microphone was not needed. The absolute silence in the ballroom carried my clear, powerful voice to every single corner of the room. "Let us talk about your financial health instead." I gave a subtle nod toward the dark sound booth. Darius instantly switched the display on the massive screen. The text messages and audio vanished, replaced immediately by the crisp, legally binding closing documents for the $1.5 million luxury penthouse in downtown Miami. The high-definition projector highlighted the bold blue signatures at the bottom of the deed. Jamal's signature sat directly next to Jada Washington's. A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. The mayor of Atlanta, seated at Shirley's table, slowly placed his linen napkin on his plate, his face a mask of profound political discomfort. The church elders who just minutes ago had been nodding in sympathetic agreement with Shirley's lies now stared at Jamal with absolute, unadulterated disgust. I was not finished. Darius clicked to the final slide. The massive screen displayed the heavily legally binding post-nuptial agreement that Jamal had arrogantly countersigned just 48 hours ago, blindly believing it was a durable power of attorney, granting him a medical conservatorship. I had Darius highlight the specific clause outlining the forfeiture of all marital assets in the event of documented financial fraud. I thought he was signing the papers to lock me inside a psychiatric ward, I announced to the silent captive audience, my eyes locked dead onto my trembling husband. But he was actually signing away 100% of his current and future assets to me. Every bank account, every investment portfolio, and the equity in our home. It all legally belongs to me now. Jada Washington, still standing near the VIP check-in desk, let out a piercing, hysterical scream. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. Jamal did not have the $4 million. He did not own the Miami penthouse. He had absolutely nothing. He had promised her a lavish billionaire lifestyle, and he was currently completely, utterly broke. She stared at Jamal on the stage, her face twisted in a mixture of profound fury and sheer terror, knowing she was carrying the child of a man who was about to lose everything. "You lied to me!" Jada shrieked across the ballroom, pointing a manicured finger at the stage. "You said you had the money. You said she was going away." At the main table, Shirley finally broke. The sheer overwhelming humiliation of her perfect family's utter destruction, playing out in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta, was too much for her fragile ego to bear. She let out a dramatic, strangled gasp, clutching her chest tightly. "Oh, Lord!" Shirley wailed loudly, her eyes rolling into the back of her head. "My heart. I am having a heart attack. Call an ambulance." She slumped heavily in her chair, waiting for the church elders to rush to her aid, desperate to stop the public humiliation by feigning a medical emergency. But nobody moved. The church elders simply stared at her, their expressions a mix of pity and severe judgment. They had heard her own daughter on the audio recording, plotting to commit a sane woman to an asylum for money. Shirley's theatrical performance fell completely flat. Terrence, entirely overwhelmed by the massive public exposure of his mob debts, scrambled backward from his chair. He bumped heavily into a waiter, sending a tray of appetizers clattering to the floor. He began to run toward the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom, his only thought to escape before the dangerous men he owed money to saw the evening news broadcast. Keisha, recognizing that her lavish fake lifestyle was officially over, sat frozen in her seat, her hands covering her face as she began to sob uncontrollably. Jamal remained paralyzed on the stage, his eyes wide and vacant. His brilliant, ruthless, perfectly executed master plan had just been violently detonated in his face. He had brought me to this gala to execute my social and financial demise, but he had unknowingly built the very scaffold for his own public execution. He looked down at me, standing poised and untouchable in my emerald gown. "You set me up," Jamal whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible over the rising murmur of the shocked crowd. "You knew everything." I looked at him, my expression completely cold and devoid of any lingering affection. "I knew exactly what you were, Jamal. I just needed you to prove it to the rest of the world." But over the rising sound of the chaos, the frantic whispers of the elite guests, Jada's continued screaming from the lobby, and Shirley's fake dramatic wailing, a new sound cut through the ballroom. It was heavy, rhythmic, and commanding. The massive double mahogany doors at the very back of the opulent ballroom suddenly burst open with immense force, slamming loudly against the interior walls. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the opulent Ritz-Carlton ballroom burst open with a loud, violent crash. The thick wood slammed forcefully against the interior walls, vibrating through the massive space. The chaotic murmurs of the 500 elite Atlanta guests instantly died in their throats. Everyone turned to look at the entrance. Striding into the brilliantly lit ballroom was a squad of 12 individuals wearing dark, unassuming windbreakers. But it was not the windbreakers that commanded the absolute terrified attention of every wealthy socialite in the room. It was the large, bold yellow letters printed across the back of the jackets. FBI, and trailing right behind them, IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The lead agent, A tall, imposing black man with an incredibly stern expression walked directly down the center aisle, moving with purposeful military precision. The crowd parted instinctively, clearing a wide path for him. Nobody dared to breathe. Nobody dared to raise their phones to record. The sheer, overwhelming gravity of a federal raid happening in the middle of the annual Black Excellence Gala paralyzed the entire room. Jamal stood frozen on the stage, the discarded microphone still emitting a low, buzzing feedback near his Italian leather shoes. He looked at the federal agents marching toward him, then looked back down at me. The realization of his total catastrophic failure finally penetrated his narcissistic, calculating brain. He had thought he was a mastermind, a brilliant investment banker playing a high-stakes game of financial chess. But he was just a pawn, and I had just flipped the entire board. The digital trap Darius had meticulously coded did not just stop at freezing Jamal's massive hidden offshore accounts. Darius had designed an aggressive automated retaliation protocol. The moment Jamal hit the execute button to steal my $4 million trust fund, Darius's program compiled every single piece of digital evidence we had gathered. It aggregated the dark web pharmaceutical receipts, the fraudulent shell company registration, the forged medical power of attorney, and the $2 million money laundering trail connected to Terrence's mob debts. Darius did not just send this massive, irrefutable dossier to the local Atlanta Police Department. He bypassed the local authorities entirely. He submitted the heavily documented, undeniable whistleblower report directly to the Federal Cybercrimes Division, automatically flagging Jamal as the primary money launderer for a massive multi-state organized crime syndicate. The federal government does not send a polite subpoena when they suspect $2 million of mob money is being actively laundered through a fake LLC. They send a heavily armed strike team to secure the assets immediately. Jamal's survival instinct finally kicked in, overriding his profound shock. He spun around, abandoning his carefully crafted public image, and sprinted frantically toward the dark, heavy curtains, concealing the backstage service exit. He thought he could slip out through the hotel kitchen and vanish into the humid Atlanta night before the agents reached the main stage. But I am a woman who builds crisis management strategies for a living. I anticipate the exit strategy before I even start the fire. As Jamal tore back the heavy black velvet curtain preparing to sprint down the service hallway, he stopped dead in his tracks. Standing directly in the narrow, dimly lit exit corridor was Chloe. She was wearing a stunning, sharp crimson pantsuit, her arms casually crossed over her chest, a look of profound, terrifying satisfaction spreading across her face. Flanking her on either side were two massive uniformed Atlanta police officers, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. "Going somewhere, Jamal?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with lethal corporate malice. "Because the terms of your newly signed post-nuptial agreement specifically state you cannot leave the jurisdiction during an active federal fraud investigation." Jamal let out a primal, desperate roar of frustration. He tried to pivot, attempting to shove past the officers to reach the loading dock doors. It was the worst mistake he could have possibly made. The two officers moved with terrifying speed. They grabbed Jamal by his expensive velvet tuxedo jacket, spinning him around violently. They slammed him face first into the unyielding brick wall of the service corridor. The sickening thud of his impact echoed clearly out into the silent ballroom. "Get your hands off me!" Jamal screamed, thrashing wildly against the brick wall. "I am a senior vice president. I know the mayor. You cannot do this to me." The officers ignored his frantic, arrogant demands. They yanked his arms roughly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. They dragged a struggling, cursing Jamal back out onto the main stage, parading him in front of the horrified, captivated audience. His expensive velvet tuxedo was rumpled and covered in white dust from the brick wall. His perfect, meticulously groomed hair was disheveled. The polished, charismatic investment banker was gone, replaced by a desperate, trapped criminal. Meanwhile, down on the ballroom floor, the federal agents had swiftly surrounded Shirley's table. Terrence, realizing the absolute magnitude of the situation, immediately threw his hands up in the air, practically surrendering before an agent even spoke to him. He was a coward, and cowards always fold when the real pressure is applied. It was not me, Terrence shrieked, his voice cracking hysterically. It was Jamal. He set up the shell company. He forced me to sign the closing documents. I did not know where the money was coming from, I swear to God. Keisha, finally breaking free from her paralyzed state of shock, leaped out of her chair. She pointed a shaking, heavily manicured finger directly at her husband's face. You absolute fool, Keisha screamed at Terrence, her voice reaching an ear-splitting, hysterical pitch. You ruined everything. You said the money was clean. You said we were going to be rich. You dragged me into this, you pathetic loser. An FBI agent stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Keisha Williams, he announced in a loud, commanding voice. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and grand larceny. Keisha shrieked as the cold steel locked around her wrists. She began thrashing wildly, screaming profanities at Terrence, at the agents, and finally at me. She looked at me standing near the stage, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated hatred. You set us up, you crazy manipulative witch, I hope you rot. I simply raised my chin, my expression utterly devoid of sympathy. I watched as the federal agents forcefully escorted my sister-in-law and brother-in-law out of the ballroom, their fake, luxurious lives permanently dismantled in front of the very society they had so desperately tried to impress. But the spectacle was not quite over. Shirley, who had been slouched in her chair, supposedly suffering a massive, life-threatening heart attack, suddenly sat bolt upright. The miraculous recovery of the century. Seeing her golden son Jamal being frog-marched down the stage stairs in heavy steel handcuffs completely broke her theatrical performance. She scrambled out of her chair, nearly tripping over her ostentatious silver-sequined dress, and sprinted directly toward the lead FBI agent. You cannot do this! Shirley wailed, waving her arms frantically in front of the stern agent. We are upstanding citizens. We are pillars of the community. My son is a good man. I is a senior executive. This is a massive misunderstanding. The lead agent looked down at Shirley with absolute profound exhaustion. Ma'am, please step back, he ordered firmly. Your son is facing multiple federal charges, including conspiracy to commit medical fraud and money laundering. He is not going anywhere. Jamal, tell them! Shirley shrieked, tears streaming down her face. Her carefully constructed, pious image completely shattered. Tell them it is a mistake. I will call the bank right now. I will put my entire house up for your bail. We will get the best lawyers in Atlanta. She was desperate to maintain the illusion of control, to prove that her family's perceived wealth and status could shield them from consequence. She thought she could simply buy their way out of federal custody. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, moving away from my table. The heavy emerald silk of my gown rustled softly against the floor. I walked directly into the center of the chaotic confrontation, positioning myself right between Shirley and the lead federal agent. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The sheer undeniable power radiating from my posture commanded the absolute attention of everyone standing in that immediate circle. I reached into my sleek emerald designer clutch and pulled out a single neatly folded piece of crisp white parchment paper. I held it gently between my fingers, a cold, predatory smile slowly spreading across my lips. You cannot use your house for bail, Shirley, I said, my voice smooth, precise, and echoing with lethal finality. Shirley stopped wailing instantly. She stared at me, her chest heaving, profound confusion mixing with the pure hatred in her eyes. What are you talking about? She spat, stepping closer. It is my house. It is fully paid for. I slowly unfolded the heavy parchment paper and held it up directly in front of her face. It was not a deed in her name. No, Shirley, it is not, I corrected her, my tone dropping to a chilling conversational level. You secretly took out a massive second mortgage on that house 6 months ago to pay for Terrence's high-priced defense lawyers when his first real estate scam collapsed. You thought nobody knew. But you defaulted on those payments 3 months ago because Jamal stopped funneling my money into your accounts. The bank officially foreclosed on the property last week. Shirley's face went completely slack. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the crisp, legally binding document in my hand, her eyes desperately scanning the heavy, bold print. I bought the property directly from the bank at auction yesterday morning. I continued, letting every single word sink deep into her fragile, arrogant ego. I paid entirely in cash. It was a remarkably good deal. So you cannot put the house up for bail, Shirley, because you do not own it anymore. In fact, standing here right now, you are currently trespassing on my property. I expect you to have your things packed and vacated by Monday morning, or I will have the county sheriff physically remove you from the premises. The absolute silence that followed my declaration was heavier than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. Shirley stared at the heavy parchment paper in my hand, her eyes frantically tracking the legal seals and the official bank transfer stamps. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her usually vibrant skin a dull, ashy gray. She had spent decades building an impenetrable fortress of social superiority, standing on the pulpit of her megachurch, judging every other woman in our community for their supposed shortcomings. She had used her massive, heavily mortgaged house as the ultimate symbol of her unearned status. And with a single sheet of paper, I had just demolished her entire kingdom. Shirley did not fake a heart attack this time. There was no theatrical gasp, no dramatic hand clutching her chest. Her knees simply buckled beneath her expensive silver sequined dress. She collapsed like a puppet with its strings violently cut, hitting the carpeted floor of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom in a crumpled, humiliating heap. Two of the church elders who had been standing nearby instinctively took a step back, actively distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of her financial ruin. Nobody reached down to help her up. In the cutthroat world of Atlanta high society, poverty and fraud are highly contagious diseases, and Shirley was officially patient zero. I turned my attention away from my former mother-in-law and looked past the federal agents toward the VIP check-in desk. Jada Washington was still standing there, her hands resting on her prominent 6-month baby bump. The smug, victorious smirk she had worn when she threatened me in the driveway was completely gone. She looked at Jamal, who was still pinned against the brick wall of the service corridor by the Atlanta police officers. She looked at the federal agents securing the ballroom perimeters. She looked at the massive projector screen still displaying the post-nuptial agreement that stripped Jamal of every single asset he possessed. Jada was young, but she was not stupid. She had survived the ruthless environment of the Atlanta nightclub scene by knowing exactly when to cut her losses and run. She realized in that exact moment that the luxury Miami penthouse did not exist. The billionaire lifestyle she had been promised was a massive criminal delusion. Jamal was not a wealthy investment banker, leaving his mentally unstable wife for a new family. He was a broke, desperate federal criminal facing a decade in a penitentiary. Jada looked at Jamal with a mixture of profound disgust and sheer terror. She did not say a single word. She simply turned her back on him, walked through the heavy glass doors of the luxury hotel, and disappeared into the humid night, leaving him with absolutely nothing. Down on the ballroom floor, the federal agents were moving with terrifying efficiency. Keisha was sobbing hysterically, her designer makeup running down her face in thick, dark streaks. The female FBI agent pulled Keisha's arms behind her back, the metal handcuffs clicking shut with a sharp, unforgiving finality. Keisha screamed, kicking her red-bottom heels against the carpet, begging anyone in the room to help her. She cried out to her wealthy friends, to the country club members she had spent years trying to impress. Every single one of them averted their eyes. "You cannot do this to me," Keisha wailed, struggling against the federal agent's firm grip. "I am a victim. Terrence lied to me, Jamal lied to me. I did not know. The credit cards were stolen. I am an influencer. You are ruining my brand." The agent simply read Keisha, her Miranda rights, in a flat, monotone voice, completely unimpressed by her delusional screaming. Terrence was already sitting on the floor nearby, handcuffed and utterly defeated. He was hyperventilating, rocking back and forth, knowing that the federal prison system was probably the safest place for him right now. The dangerous men he owed $2 million to were watching this entire spectacle unfold on social media live streams. Going to jail was the only thing keeping Terrence breathing. I slowly walked toward the backstage service corridor, where the Atlanta police officers were currently holding Jamal. My emerald green silk gown glided smoothly across the floor. The officers saw me approaching and respectfully stepped back just a few inches, allowing me enough space to face my husband. Jamal was on his knees, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The pristine custom-tailored velvet tuxedo he had worn so proudly just an hour ago was ruined. He looked up at me, his face twisted in an ugly mask of pure unadulterated hatred and profound defeat. "You set me up!" Jamal spat, his voice trembling with furious rage. "You planned this entire thing. You let me bring that fake doctor into the house. You let me sign those papers. You stole my money. You destroyed my family. You are a monster, Zoe, a cold, calculating monster." I looked down at the man I had loved, the man I had vowed to build a life with. I felt absolutely no sadness, no regret, and no anger. I only felt a deep, abiding sense of justice. I slowly knelt down on the carpeted floor, bringing myself perfectly level with his face. I reached out with a steady hand and gently adjusted his crooked, dusty bow tie, fixing it with the same meticulous care a loving wife would provide before a major corporate event. "No, Jamal." I whispered, my voice completely smooth and devoid of any emotion. "I am not a monster. I am just a woman who did not eat her pasta." The words hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened in absolute terrifying realization. He finally understood the exact moment his entire empire began to crumble. He realized that I had known about his lethal betrayal from the very first second. I had let him play his arrogant, manipulative game, allowing him to build the perfect trap, only to lock him inside it and throw away the key. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely, utterly broken. "Take them out," the lead FBI agent ordered, his voice echoing authoritatively through the quiet ballroom. The police officers hoisted Jamal to his feet. They marched him down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The federal agents followed closely behind, dragging a sobbing Keisha and a catatonic Terrence. Two paramedics who had been called for Shirley's fake heart attack ended up placing her in a wheelchair and rolling her out right behind her disgraced children. The perp walk was absolutely brutal. It was the ultimate social execution. 500 of Atlanta's most prominent figures, the mayor, the city council members, the hospital executives, and the mega-church leaders, watched in stunning silence as the supposedly perfect elite family was paraded out of the Ritz-Carlton in federal handcuffs. Nobody offered them sympathy. Nobody offered to call a lawyer. The society that Jamal and his family had worshipped, the very people they had tried to impress by stealing my wealth, were now witnessing their absolute destruction. The flashing cameras of the local media, originally brought there to capture the glamour of the Black Excellence Gala, were now rapidly documenting the greatest corporate and social scandal the city had seen in decades. Reporters pushed aggressively against the velvet ropes, shouting loud questions that Jamal could not answer. The bright, relentless camera flashes repeatedly illuminated his terrified, profusely sweating face, permanently recording his monumental, humiliating downfall for tomorrow's front-page news across the entire country. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung shut behind the federal agents, sealing the toxic family's grim fate. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the frosted glass windows of the hotel lobby, casting an eerie, rhythmic glow across the silent room. I stood alone in the very center of the massive ballroom, the undisputed victor of a devastating war I never asked to fight. My brother Darius emerged from the dark sound booth on the second-floor balcony, giving me a silent, respectful salute. Chloe, my brilliant corporate attorney, walked over and handed me a fresh crystal flute of expensive champagne. She clinked her glass against mine, the delicate sound ringing clearly in the quiet space. "We did exactly what we came to do," Chloe murmured softly, smiling with intense satisfaction. I raised my glass of champagne toward the massive projector screen, which was still brightly displaying the post-nuptial agreement that secured my entire future and dismantled my husband's life. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of the crisp, cold liquid. The victory was absolute, undeniable, and perfectly executed. I had protected my father's legacy, defended my life, and surgically removed a cancerous family from my existence. I had survived the worst, most intimate betrayal imaginable, and I emerged victorious. I was ready. 6 months had passed since the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the grand entrance of the Ritz-Carlton. 6 months since the carefully constructed fraudulent empire of my in-laws collapsed in spectacular fashion in front of Atlanta elite. Today I was trading the opulent chandelier-lit ballrooms of Buckhead for a completely different atmosphere. The long drive from my luxurious penthouse in downtown Atlanta to the grim outskirts of the city had given me ample time to reflect on the sheer magnitude of my victory. The rolling green hills slowly gave way to towering barbed wire fences and intimidating guard towers. The transition was a perfect physical metaphor for the journey Jamal had taken. I sat perfectly still in a sterile, freezing cold, windowless concrete visitor room inside a high-security federal penitentiary just outside the city limits. The air in the facility smelled heavily of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and profound despair. It was the scent of absolute defeat. I was wearing a sharply tailored, pristine white designer suit, a deliberate, glaring contrast to the grim, gray cinderblock walls surrounding me. I checked my diamond wristwatch. I had cleared exactly 15 minutes in my busy executive schedule for this final necessary closure. The heavy steel door on the opposite side of the reinforced glass partition buzzed loudly. A burly correctional officer stepped through, firmly leading a prisoner into the bleak visiting area. I watched calmly as my former husband Jamal shuffled toward the designated metal stool. The physical transformation was absolutely staggering. His vibrant, confident aura had been completely extinguished. The charismatic, impeccably groomed investment banker who used to command corporate boardrooms was entirely gone. In his place was a hollowed-out, broken man, wearing a baggy, bright orange canvas jumpsuit that swallowed his shrinking frame. The bright orange canvas jumpsuit was rough and unforgiving, a stark contrast to the tailored Italian silk he used to wear with such arrogant pride. His formerly perfect sharp hairline was severely overgrown and unkempt. Deep dark purple bags hung heavily beneath his bloodshot eyes, and his posture was completely defeated. His shoulders were slumped, curving inward, as if he were constantly trying to make himself as small and invisible as possible to survive his new, brutal environment. I noticed his hands. The same hands that had once caressed my face and secretly crushed pills into my food were now dry, cracked, and trembling violently under the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked at me with the desperate, starving eyes of a feral animal that had finally realized the trap was completely inescapable. He sat down heavily on the metal stool, picking up the black plastic telephone receiver with trembling, calloused hands. I picked up my own receiver, keeping my expression perfectly neutral and completely unreadable. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited for him to speak. Zoe Jamal whispered into the phone, his voice a raspy, weak shadow of its former smooth confidence. "You actually came. I did not think you would ever come. I am a woman who finishes what she starts." "Jamal," I replied, my tone flat, professional, and entirely devoid of any lingering affection. "I simply wanted to see the final return on my investment." He flinched violently, closing his eyes, as if the sound of my calm, steady voice caused him physical pain. He gripped the plastic receiver tighter with both hands, leaning his forehead against the thick, smudged glass partition separating us. "I am so sorry, Zoe." He choked out genuine, desperate tears, instantly welling up in his exhausted eyes. "I am so unbelievably sorry for everything. You have no idea what it is like in here. It is a literal nightmare. Every single day is absolute torture. I have lost everything. I have nothing left." I leaned back slightly in my comfortable chair, crossing my legs elegantly. I allowed the heavy, oppressive silence to stretch out, forcing him to sit in his own pathetic misery. His tears were not born of genuine remorse. They were born of absolute selfish pity. He was crying for the loss of his Miami penthouse, for the loss of his stolen $4 million, and for the loss of his unearned freedom. He was crying because he had finally met someone significantly smarter than him. "It is not just me." Jamal continued, his words tumbling out in a rushed, frantic stream, desperate to elicit even a single ounce of my sympathy. "The whole family is completely destroyed." Terrence panicked when the federal agents brought up his real estate fraud. He completely folded during the interrogation. He flipped on the mob bosses who loaned him the $2 million. He testified against them to avoid a massive federal sentence. The government placed Terrence in the Witness Protection Program. He vanished into thin air overnight. He traded his loyalty for a cheap suit and a new identity in a freezing Midwestern town, completely abandoning the fake luxury lifestyle he had dragged his wife into. He left Keisha behind to deal with the entire mess alone. I maintained my icy, unblinking stare. Terrence was always a coward, I stated simply. Jamal nodded frantically, tears spilling down his hollow, unshaven cheeks. Keisha is ruined, he sobbed. The federal court seized all her fake designer bags, her cars, and froze all her accounts to pay back the credit card fraud restitution. She had to declare total bankruptcy. She could not find a single job in Atlanta because everyone saw her arrested on the evening news. Keisha is facing the harsh reality of manual labor. The woman who once mocked my quiet dedication to my career was now scraping grease off fryers. She is currently working the late-night drive-through window at a greasy fast food chain just trying to pay off her massive legal fees. She takes the public bus to work because she cannot afford a car. The people from our old church drive by and take pictures of her wearing a paper hat to mock her on social media. She is living in a cheap motel, terrified of the very people she used to look down upon. I felt a brief, dark surge of profound satisfaction. Keisha had handed me a spiked cocktail with a malicious smirk. Now she was handing out cheap fries for minimum wage. The scales of justice were perfectly balanced, and my mother Jamal wept, his voice breaking completely. Shirley lost everything. When you legally purchased her foreclosed mansion, she had nowhere to go. Shirley's spectacular fall from grace was perhaps the most poetic justice of all. The woman who had proudly declared me mentally unfit in front of the entire church congregation was now the ultimate social pariah. When the federal agents exposed the source of her wealth, the megachurch board of directors moved with ruthless speed. They publicly denounced her actions, scrubbing her name from every single charity committee and donation plaque. Her megachurch officially excommunicated her to protect their own public relations image. The mayor blocked her phone number. The prestigious social clubs banned her from the premises. She is completely isolated, left to rot in a neighborhood she had spent her entire life trying to escape. She had to move into a tiny, dilapidated one-bedroom apartment on the absolute worst, most dangerous side of town. The neighborhood is overrun with crime. She is terrified to even walk out of her front door to check the mail. She has no friends, no money, and no dignity left. She calls me in tears every week. I watched him cry, feeling absolutely no pity for the woman who had spent years trying to break my spirit and publicly humiliate me. Shirley built a house of cards on a foundation of cruel arrogance. A stiff breeze would have knocked it down eventually. I just happened to be the hurricane. Jamal wiped his wet face with the rough orange sleeve of his prison uniform. He looked up at me, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He tried to straighten his posture, attempting to summon a tiny fraction of his old charming manipulative persona. The smooth investment banker desperately trying to close one final impossible deal. "Zoe, please," Jamal begged, his voice dropping into a soft, pleading register. "I know I messed up terribly, but the food in here is completely inedible. I have to buy basic necessities from the prison commissary just to survive, but my accounts are entirely empty. The federal government seized everything I owned based on the post-nuptial agreement you tricked me into signing. You have all of my money. You have everything I spent my entire life building. I do not even have $5 for soap." He pressed his hand against the glass. "We were family once, Zoe. I made a mistake." I looked at him with absolute indifference. "You did not make a mistake, Jamal. You made a choice, and I made a choice to survive." I stood up, leaving him weeping at the table. The heavy steel doors of the federal penitentiary slammed shut behind me with a loud, reverberating clang that echoed across the sterile concrete courtyard. I did not look back. I walked straight forward into the blinding, beautiful Atlanta sunshine. The thick, oppressive smell of the prison instantly vanished, replaced by the warm, sweet scent of Georgia pines and absolute freedom. My crisp white designer suit caught the bright morning light as I descended the long concrete steps toward the visitor parking lot. Leaning casually against the hood of my gleaming black luxury sedan were the two people who had helped me orchestrate the greatest, most devastatingly perfect retaliation of my entire life. Chloe, my brilliant, ruthless corporate attorney, was sipping an iced coffee behind a pair of oversized dark sunglasses. My younger brother Darius, the cybersecurity genius, who had digitally dismantled my former husband and his criminal network, was grinning widely, holding open the back door of my car. We did not need to say a single word about the pathetic, broken man I had just left weeping in the visitor room. The absolute victory radiating from our silent, shared glance was more than enough. I slid into the comfortable leather seat, leaving the suffocating nightmare of Jamal and his toxic, greedy family behind me forever. The following 6 months were a masterclass in aggressive, unapologetic rebirth. I did not just survive the most intimate, terrifying betrayal imaginable. I completely weaponized it. Professionally, the highly publicized scandal did not ruin my reputation. In the cutthroat corporate world of Atlanta, my flawless, cold-blooded execution of a hostile domestic takeover made me a terrifyingly respected figure. My public relations firm did not just recover, it absolutely exploded. My annual revenue doubled within 3 months, as massive corporate clients flocked to hire the woman who could single-handedly dismantle a federal fraud ring without smudging her makeup. Financially, Chloe and her brilliant legal maneuvering proved utterly flawless. The court fully upheld the aggressively structured post-nuptial agreement Jamal had blindly signed. The judge formally awarded me 100% of his liquidated assets. I systematically drained his investment portfolios, sold his luxury vehicles, and seized the equity from his hidden real estate ventures. But I did not keep his dirty money for my own personal wealth. I funneled every single stolen dime into something far more powerful. I founded and fully endowed a nonprofit organization dedicated entirely to protecting women, particularly within the minority community, from covert financial abuse and domestic gaslighting. We provided free elite legal counsel, cybersecurity audits, and immediate emergency housing for victims trapped by manipulative, predatory partners. I took the exact weapons Jamal had used against me and forged them into a massive, impenetrable shield for hundreds of other vulnerable women. On the exact 1-year anniversary of the night, I caught Jamal crushing those heavy antipsychotic pills into my seafood pasta. I drove to the quiet, rolling green hills of the historic Oakland Cemetery. The humid summer air was thick and peaceful as I walked slowly along the manicured, shaded pathways. I carried a massive, beautiful bouquet of vibrant white lilies, my late father, and his absolute favorite flower. I reached his elegant marble headstone, knelt gracefully on the soft grass, and placed the fresh flowers gently against the cool stone. I traced my fingers over his engraved name, a profound, unshakable sense of peace finally settling deep into my chest. He had spent his entire life working relentlessly to build a secure, prosperous future for his only daughter, leaving behind a $4 million trust fund to ensure I would always be completely independent. Jamal and his greedy, manipulative family had tried to steal that legacy. They had tried to break my mind, strip my autonomy, and drain the wealth my father had painstakingly accumulated. I looked down at the engraved marble and smiled a soft, genuine smile. "Your legacy is perfectly safe, Dad," I whispered into the quiet afternoon breeze. "I protected everything you built for me, and I used it to build an empire of my own." I stood up, brushing a stray blade of grass from my tailored skirt, feeling stronger, sharper, and infinitely more powerful than the naive woman who had walked down the wedding aisle 5 years ago. I walked back to my car, completely ready to embrace the brilliant, unwritten future stretching out before me. My journey through absolute darkness had taught me the most valuable defining lesson of my entire existence. When people talk about romance, they say love is blind. But when people show you who they really are, you have to open your eyes. You cannot afford to look away or make excuses for their toxic, dangerous behavior. Never let anyone make you feel crazy for trusting your own intuition. If your gut is screaming that something is terribly wrong in your relationship, you must listen to that internal alarm immediately. My survival depended entirely on my ability to stay calm, gather undeniable evidence, and strike back with absolute ruthless precision when the perfect moment finally arrived. Now I want to hear directly from all of you watching this video today. Have you ever had to set a trap to expose a toxic partner or family member? Have you ever caught a liar in the act and used their own deceit to completely destroy their false narrative? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one of your experiences, and your bravery constantly inspires me to keep sharing these vital lessons. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of taking back your power and exposing the narcissists who think they can easily manipulate us. Your support helps this community grow stronger every single day. Until next time, please remember to always stay incredibly safe. Always trust your intuition and your sharp instincts, fiercely protect your hard-earned financial assets, and always carefully watch your drink before taking a single sip.